USC, NYU, Boston, these are just three examples of colleges that every single admission season receive 60,000 or more applications. And just to put that number in context, because it sounds like a big number, but I don't know if we naturally wrap our heads around a number of that size. We spoke with, why isn't that coming onto your screen? We spoke with a number of heads of college admissions departments at selective schools like these, and they also, they would love to have 2 hours per application to look at each student, who you are. What does your GPA say about you? Not just the overall score, but what classes did you excel in? What classes were more of a challenge? Did you challenge yourself with the rigor of various courses in the areas of study that you say you want to look at in college? They can learn a lot by really studying that transcript beyond just a simple number. They would love to spend time with your personal statement and your supplemental essays and look at your letters of recommendation, tie all of this together into a coherent narrative about each student. And they anticipate that would take roughly 2 hours per application for someone to really do a thorough job on that per student. And so the next question was, well, okay, if you've got your 60,000 plus applications and you spend 2 hours per application, how long would it take you then to put together one freshman class? It's a very natural question. And 63 years was the answer to that. So an extremely long time. Obviously, that's not going to get it done when they're trying to put together a new freshman college class every year. Even with their staff of 30, it takes more than 2 years to do it. And they actually need to get the job done in a matter of 3 to 4 months. So from when the applications arrive to send out the acceptances and the denials, and then see who comes back amongst the acceptances and says, yes, we're going to come to your college. And it's these types of fundamentals are what shift emphasis onto the SAT and the ACT. And it's important to understand this, that it's these types of logistical hurdles that make the SAT and the ACT important. Because a lot of people have this illusion that those tests are important because they tell us something of value about students, tell us how smart you are, or what your capability is, or your potential for the future. The tests they don't pretend to do that. They don't claim to do that. And they certainly do not do that, any of those things. All these tests are, in essence, are very standardized. And that means if you take it again and again and again, you'll roughly get the same score. Standardized assessments to measure fundamentals in mathematics and the humanities, right? And so they're just looking at those fundamental abilities, and their value, though, is not in the insights that they give us into students. Their value is that it's the same for each student, because you can imagine from this, we look at this poor college admissions lady right here, if she is trying to compare the GPAs and the rigor of courses from high schools all across the country, not just one county or one state, but all across the country, and then throw in from other high schools around the world, you can see why it would be useful to have a metric that was the same for everyone else. And then the last thing I want to say about these tests, as we move a little bit more into logistics, is that when admissions officers look at your test scores, just to take the mystique off these tests a little bit more, because I think all of that helps you to feel better about them and perform better on them. They're never evaluated by themselves. There is no score that on the SAT or the ACT that guarantees admission to USC. There's no GPA that guarantees admission to you. And that is just one college. I'm just taking one selective school out of thousands that we could choose from, or hundreds that we could choose from, because USC is right in our backyard. All of these scores, all of these numbers, these quantitative measurements of each student, they're always used in context with each other. And so this is a great example of how you can see GPA moving up and down on this side. And then on this axis, we have SAT and ACT scores. And so this would be scores on the very bottom of the scale, which would be a 12 on the ACT or a 660 on the SAT. Scores can be a little bit lower than that in reality, but they're usually not applying to selective universities like USC. And then it moves all the way up here to a perfect 36 on the ACT or a perfect 1600 on the SAT. And I'm going to take one brief one brief pause here. I'm not going to spend a lot of tonight talking about the differences between the specific differences between SAT and ACT. Number one, I would bore all of you to death, and who wants that? This is hard enough having to do it over Zoom to begin with. And second of all, it's not necessarily important information for any of you. All you want to do is take a practice version of each one and see which one you're naturally better at. You don't need to know the specific number of questions that fall into trigonometry. There happen to be a handful of them on each ACT and a few more on the SAT. These differences aren't necessarily important, but I know some of you want those. And this is a handout that I normally would give out at this event so that anyone could look over it during the presentation. I've got a digital version here, and that should be up on your screen now. This address right here, and I will copy it into the chat box as well so everyone can see that. There are a number of free resources there. This is the SAT versus ACT comparison chart. You just click that, it will open, and then you can see the full flyer in all its glory. And if anyone really wants to know the very specific differences between the two tests, it's all right here on this flyer. There's also information there for anyone that wants it from OSHA. Finding the right fit, this just looks at the score ranges, typical score ranges for the 100 most applied to colleges. And then there's a timeline for getting prepared for these tests, and it also helps you convert your scores between ACT and SAT. So a lot of just great free resources there. And again, I would normally hand that out to you on a website, but we're unable to do that tonight. All right, let's just dig in real quick on what we're going to see at these colleges. And this year is going to be different, right? For a lot of 12th graders, they are going to be going into this in a test optional year, which means that a lot of schools said, hey, if you can't test, we're not going to require it so that you can still send us your application. I think this was the right thing to do. It is a welcome deviation from the norm, given the circumstances, just a great decision from these colleges. However, the majority of of admissions officers at these selective schools have said, if you can send us a score, please do so, because it makes it easier to figure out who we should say yes to. Now in California, we have had a lot of test cancellations, so we're going to be given even more of a pass for our 12th graders for this current year for 12th graders. It is my firm belief that by the time you 11th graders come around, all of this will have been dealt with in one way or another. No matter what this current situation is at that time with COVID, there will either be, the disease will be under control, we will have means of dealing with it, or there will be an online version of the test that you're able to take. One way or another, the colleges have really said, hey, we need these scores to help make decisions and to make the right decisions so that it's a fair process. And so I do believe you guys, it will be important to take your SATs and your ACTs. And so if you forget everything else I say tonight, I would remember that one thing, especially for you juniors. I know things are different right now, but that's a piece of the puzzle you probably don't want to neglect, because it can only increase your options for college. And I'll show you what I mean here. Okay, so what we're looking at on this chart, red dots were denied to USC. And this is actually data from a private high school in Orange County over a 2-year period. And so the red dot, sorry, I think it was a 3 or 4 year period, because this is a lot of students. The red dots were denied admission to USC. The green dots were accepted to USC. And then the blue dots were also accepted, but they decided to attend a different college. Now, what you're going to notice here, usually we would do this in an interactive Q&A format, but I'm just going to ask the questions and supply the answers. What students invariably notice here is that the red dots tend to be on the right, like as this moves up in a diagonal fashion, GPA is going up and test scores are going up, because those two things are used in conjunction. And red tends to be here when we have lower GPAs and lower test scores, or even with a really high GPA, but a very low test score. And same thing with a very strong test score, but a very low GPA. We want those things to kind of move in concert. And so that there's a little give and take. If the GPA is a little lower than you want it to be, hey, you can make up some ground with the test score and vice versa. But when there's extreme differences, that sometimes can raise a red flag. Now, there are always exceptions, right? We've got, and then the green dots, as we move further up, the higher scores, higher grades tend to be more successful. And this is kind of our competitive, this is what we would call the competitive range at USC, where it's about 50-50 based on those grades and scores. And that's where there's a lot of green. And then above it, there's a lot of blue. And in that blue zone, you see a lot of kids going to other colleges. So let's go through real quick in these three different scenarios. If you're behind the curve, in the middle of the curve, or ahead of the curve. If you're behind the curve, you probably need something else to pull your application up and make you stand out. That could be that you're an incredible athlete, certainly at a school like USC. It could be another thing that USC tends to like, and a number of private universities would be a development case. And that's someone who, that's admission speak for someone who might donate a building someday. Some type of performance artists, of which there are many of you at OSHA, and I'm not going to go through every single type of those, but I'm sure you're very familiar with all the shapes and flavors that that performance might come in. All those are students, when they're excellent in their field, that a college might make an exception for on the grades and scores. Now, if we move up into this, and you can see there are a smattering of green dots out here where that's exactly how that went. If you're in the middle here, that's where there's probably a number of students like you that have very similar grades and scores. Great, you got your foot in the door. Now it's all about the things that make you interesting. That's what's going to make the difference. Your personal statement, your supplemental essays, your letters of recommendation, things you do outside of school. And I would note, not that we need to cover everything tonight, because we only have an hour. But when you're going through those activities, especially for my ninth graders, as you move through high school, you don't so much need to have a huge breadth of activities. Just dive deep into the activities that you really get into. And I think this is a healthy development in college admissions, which is where, rather than looking for students that do everything, and just, you can only, if you're doing everything, you can only get so into it, move so in depth with it. They've moved over the last few years towards students that go for that deep dive into something that they're passionate about. And so we really encourage students, hey, you don't have to take every AP course available to you. Take the APs in the courses that get you excited, the ones that are just a little bit, I don't want to say fun to study, because invariably somebody's gonna say none of my classes are fun, but the ones that are more enjoyable and interesting to you, the ones where the challenge, you welcome the challenge in those courses, take the APs there. And same thing with the activities. You don't have to do all of them, but really get after the ones that you're passionate about. And then our last group up here would be people that are ahead of the curve. And this is a great place to be. And everyone is ahead of the curve somewhere, right? We're just looking at USC, but if we move this same set of scores and grades at different colleges, all those ranges would move. So you want to have a balanced list where you're actually behind most kids at a certain college. Those are your reach schools, right? Those are the ones you're really going for. And hey, Stanford's a reach for every single student who applies there. Same thing with the Ivies and MIT and Caltech. Those are reaches for everyone. So you just throw your hat in the ring and see what happens. You want to have a number of schools where you're right in the middle of the pack, and then a number of schools which we're going to call your likely schools. I don't really like safety because that has a derogatory connotation, but your likely schools. These are you're likely to get in there. I like that, and I like students that get excited about schools they're likely to get into. Some really good things happen when you're ahead of this curve. You'll notice there are a lot of blue dots. And again, that means those students were accepted to USC, but they matriculated to a different college. USC does not, if they offer you acceptance, they don't want you to matriculate somewhere else. It's kind of like getting a date to the prom. Like, once they ask you to come, they really want you to say yes. So what they do, and this is much more common with our private universities, in order to entice students who are above the normal competitive range for their school, they offer merit-based scholarships. And who doesn't like free money for college, especially these days during these times? So merit-based aid is, for the most part, determined by your quantitative measurements, would be GPA and then an SAT or an ACT score. And it's completely independent of need. So need has nothing to do with it. And the pool of merit-based aid across the country is about the same size as the pool of need-based aid. So this is in everybody's best interest to try to figure out where the schools fall that you're going to apply to, where they fall on their philosophy, what kind of merit-based aid they offer, and if you can figure that out, what scores you might need to qualify for it, because you can really open up more options that way. And then the last thing I just want to say, because I know we need to get into specifics about testing here. We're about halfway through, and we're just focusing on the big picture, but the big picture is really where the action's at, because now everything when we talk about testing, it's going to make sense to you guys. Is that this is a student right here. This is the same student in terms of GPA. And all that changed from moving from in these three zones on the graph was their SAT or ACT score. And I want to emphasize that because most students tend to think of an SAT or an ACT as an anxiety producing situation, that it might be a judgment on who they are, that if they don't do well, it could close doors for them to college. All of that couldn't be further from the truth. Here is the reality. You're at OSHA, which is a fantastic high school. Again, I'm a big fan. My kids aren't quite old enough, but fingers crossed someday. I'm a big fan of OSHA, and there are colleges across the country that are going to want you to come there, no matter what your test scores are or your GPA is. They know you're coming from a very rigorous school and a school that produces interesting students. So they're going to want you. You're going to have options. All these tests can do are open more doors for you. And that is an important, it's an important piece of my philosophy when it comes to this. And I'm definitely not here to talk about test prep gurus. I'm just here to give everybody good information, but this is something that is personally important to me, which is I really want students, anytime you have an interaction with me or anybody on the team, to know that the tests are not assessments, they're opportunities. All they can do are open up scholarship doors and some of these doors to these more selective colleges. Because what we've seen is when you start to think that way and approach the process that way, it's good for your mental health and it's good for your performance, meaning you're going to score a little bit higher just by approaching the exams that way. And that's the type of win-win we are always looking for in this process. Okay, and somebody said, I feel like you have read the book, How to Be a High School Superstar. That's funny. I have not read that book. I don't know that book. Perhaps I will take a look at it after this. And then we have one other question. Was that a weighted GPA on this last slide here? So this is unweighted, and this was the data that was given to us, that was made public by the school. And that's a very sophisticated question. All that means is, are they weighting the grades, as in when there's an honors or an AP course, can you earn over a 4.0? And pretty much all selective colleges can view your GPA through various lenses. And what that means is, with the click of a button, they can move between your weighted GPA, your unweighted GPA. They can see weighted GPA without senior and freshman grades, or just without freshman grades, and then the unweighted version of those two things as well. And so they can click around, it helps them look at a student from a few different viewpoints. But it's nothing that you don't already know. It's good to take tough courses because colleges like rigorous. They like to see you challenge yourself with rigor, again, especially in the areas that you say you might want to study in college. So if you want to go pre-med, hopefully you're really challenging yourself with your science courses. And the same thing if you say you want to go to humanities, challenge yourself in your English and history courses. All right, let's keep moving on. I'm going to touch on this briefly because this is really important right now, where again, anxiety is at a pretty much an all-time high for the past 20 years when it comes to testing and admissions. I think this is a great example of how students, they have realized over the last few years that they're in control of their destiny, at least when it comes to this testing aspect. And again, we're working with, when we look at certainly the county and most of Southern California, students coming from strong schools, all these tests are doing are again offering more opportunities to students. And this is a good example of taking control of that process, where in 2001, we saw 89 perfect ACT scores across the country. And then we go from, so from 2001 to 2016, the number of ACT test takers doubled. So we would expect to see roughly double this 89. By the time we get to 2016, we'd expect to see 178 or so perfect scores in the ACT. Instead, we see 2,235. And again, that is still a tiny, tiny fraction of students who take the test. So I don't want to give you the impression that everyone is earning a score like that. Why I am showing you this is to emphasize that we're no longer in a place where we've got students who are naturally good at these exams, and then students who aren't naturally good at these exams, and you're just kind of stuck with the results, because I think a lot of students felt that way for a number of years. What we have now is a process that really rewards hard work. Both testing agencies have said, hey, if you work hard at preparing for these exams, your score will move up. And that is a much more honest and healthy environment for students to look at these tests, because no one would want to go into a calculus course in high school and the grade you get on the first day, that's the grade you get for the class. Doesn't matter how hard you want to work, doesn't matter if you want to learn and really get after it and try to improve yourself to reach a better goal in that class. It's just what you get on the first day. I mean, I think we can all agree that's not a fair process. And so I'm glad we're in an environment now where everyone can be, the testing agencies, to be frank, are now being forthright finally about this, that working these tests does help, because they've realized that's a more healthy process for students to go through, and because they feel like they're in control of the process to go out there and work hard to reach the goals they set for themselves. All right, let's keep pushing forward. Now we get to the specifics, right at the halfway mark. What do we do next? Okay. For my ninth graders out there, I saw there were several of you right there on the screen. That's the key. That's the key to brain development, as far as I'm concerned, is to read, but not just the books in school. Read for pleasure. If I could convince you to do one thing this school year, especially right now where we all have a little bit of extra free time, read for pleasure. It's going to help your grades over every subsequent year of high school and in college. It's going to introduce you to new ideas and help you to think more creatively and more innovatively. And quite honestly, when I see what's going on out there right now, we need you young people to be as creative and innovative as possible, because I am convinced that just having the chance to work with so many young high school age students, your generation will absolutely change the world. You guys have clear visions for where you want to go, who you want to be, what you want the world to look like. And I just think you need to get, as soon as you guys are all old enough to get out there and make those visions happen, I'm really excited about what it's just going to do for society in general. But for you guys, I want you to read for pleasure as a side bonus that is really just a very little importance. But since we're here to talk about standardized testing, I'll mention it. Reading for pleasure will help you to score higher by the time you're an 11th grader on the one section of the test that is the most challenging to improve your score on, is the critical reading portion of the SAT or the ACT. And the reason it's challenging to improve that score, you can do it. It just takes time, and students that don't ever read for pleasure, it takes them quite a lot more time to achieve the same improvements, because what you're essentially trying to do is learning to read faster and retain more information while you're reading faster. And that skill you will have developed all on your own if you're reading for pleasure for the next 2 years. And you still might need some guidance in how to do that. But when we've done pretty extensive surveys and looking at various variables to see which kind of students are easy to teach and which ones are have a rougher go in taking in the information that helps enable them to achieve higher scores. This one popped off the charts, read for pleasure. And the sooner you start, the better. And I would say this, and for any parents listening, I actually do not care what it is they read for pleasure. When we dug in deeper, it didn't matter if these kids started reading The Economist when they were in the sixth grade, or if they were in the 11th grade and they really like to read Harry Potter, or maybe not US Weekly, but certainly we didn't test for tabloids. But when any type of fiction had the same results. And so as long as they're reading for pleasure, go for it. Whatever you like, keep reading that. All right, my 10th graders. Now, what you're gonna want to do, first key thing, every college accepts either SAT or ACT. No college requires you to send them both tests. That is a good development that we know this right from the colleges themselves. You do not need to send them an SAT and an ACT. They just want to see the highest score you can send them on one exam or the other. And that is going to, by knowing that, it's going to save you time and energy so you're not preparing for two different tests. So my first step that I want to encourage everybody to do, take an ACT or a pre-ACT. Step 2, take an SAT or a PSAT. Now, for any 10th grader in the spring, OSHA has a plan in place to administer a PSAT and a pre-ACT so that you will have a score of each. Excuse me there, throat's just getting dry. You'll have a score of each, and then you can compare those two scores. Now, this chart is one option. This is a simplified version. You can also go to that link I shared earlier. There's a little bit more detailed chart on comparing scores. And while I'm at it, before I forget, I'm going to put this up, and we're actually helping to administer that PSAT and pre-ACT for OSHA. It is our pleasure to do so because we really like helping your school in any way that we can. If anyone who, especially your 11th graders, if anyone, you can go right here to this address. If you contact us through the website here and just say you'd like a free mock exam, and that can be a full length SAT or ACT, we're more than happy to send one to you for free. Just say you are a student at OSHA and the wheels will start turning. That can be administered. We'll basically send it to you online, and students can take those at their leisure whenever they want to, or they can do it on a Saturday through a Zoom call, but with a test proctor who will walk you through the exam, just like the way that it works in real life. And again, that's our pleasure to do that for any OSHA family out there. And where is my chat box? My chat box disappeared. Well, if somebody wants to put, oh gosh, you better put it in there before I forget. Oh, I lost my chat box. All right. Well, I don't want to waste too much time. I'll figure out a way to get it in there at the end. Okay. Oh, it took us back to the beginning. Okay. 9th graders, 10th graders. Here we go. Step 3, you're going to compare those two scores and choose which test that you want to take. And this is basically, those are the steps I want all of the 10th graders to complete by the end of this school year. And so if you decide to do that early in the year, that's fine. If you decide to do it later in the school year, that's fine too. I would just say sometime before you finish 10th grade, take one of each of those exams, compare the scores, and decide which path you're going to get on. The only exception, students that might need to start this earlier, and at OSHA, you have excellent counselors, and they will know if you're one of these students, but you can always ask your counselor. Depending on certain majors and certain performance, just if you're in a certain school and if you're on some very specific paths to very specific schools, they might need your scores earlier, and so you might need to start this process earlier. And so I just want to make that note. But just check with your counselors at OSHA, and they can help you to sort that out. All right. Oh, here we go. Okay, I got it. Figured it out. There it is. There's the link for anyone who needs that. Can a freshman take the free exam? Absolutely, yes. We really enjoy working with OSHA families, and so that's no problem at all. And if you are in the 11th grade and you only took one practice exam, is it too late to try the other one? No, it is not at all. And we're going to move to our 11th graders right now and discuss that. But when we give these exams, we don't use a hybrid exam that tests SAT and ACT at once. And I know those are convenient, but they aren't terribly accurate. And we are sticklers for having everything to be as truthful and as painstakingly accurate as possible in this process, because we need to know what your starting score is to make good decisions about which test you should move to. And so the most accurate way to do that is to take one SAT and one ACT on 2 separate days and then compare the scores. That is the best way forward. Plus, as you work at the test and try to move through the exams and improve your score, we need an accurate starting score, because the most motivating factor for any student, because at the beginning, most students are like, this sucks. I don't like this at all, until they see their score move up a little bit. That first time it moves up a little bit, they go, oh, gosh, maybe this is actually helping. And then they see it move up again, and then they start working harder and putting more time and energy into it, because they know it will pay off for them and their goals. And it is truly, to all you students, it's about you and your goals, not your teachers, not your parents, not anybody else. We want to achieve your goals for the future. And when you take ownership of your goals and where you want to go, there is no limit to the amount of work you can put into this, and subsequently where you can push your scores. So let's talk about our 11th graders for a second. Okay. Now, questions are pouring in as we get to 11th grade. All right, and I promise I will take some of these more specific ones. I'm gonna try to tackle them right at the end. Let me see how I'm doing here on time. 6:12. Okay, so we got to get through. Let me get through the most critical things, and then anyone who, if I don't get to your specific question, use that same link on the contact page. Submit that question in there, and I will make sure to email you a response. Or someone, actually, we may even have someone who is an expert in college admissions just give you a 5-minute call to really talk you through an answer, depending on how complicated your question is. I think you only sent the link to the practice test to one person. Oh, okay. Thank you for pointing that out. I'm going to do that again. Now it's out there to everybody. Okay, there is the link. Thank you, Elizabeth, for pointing that out. Okay, to my 11th graders. This is, you know what is the weirdest thing about these Zoom webinars and calls? It's that I'm actually used to it now. I'm reading the chat box, doing this. I mean, I really prefer live events personally. It's just more fun to interact with people, but it's become normal to me. Now, this is a little bit different. The accelerated path for juniors is mostly non-existent, because most of you did not do any preparation during the summer. I know there's a handful of you out there, but what I want to focus on is the majority of students who are in the 11th grade, and because of COVID, probably haven't done what they normally would have completed by this point in the process. It is okay. You're gonna be all right. The number one thing you need to do, and this for you juniors would be right now, as in let's get it going right now, is to get a mock SAT and a mock ACT under your belt, and then compare those scores and put together a plan of action. And again, we've been helping OSHA families with this for years, and there is no charge for any of this. You can take one of each of those tests, and then someone will help you figure out which one you're a little bit better at, and they will push you in the right direction to make sure you are working on the right test and have a proper timeline in place to achieve your goals for college. So I put this up here. This is a generic example, and you would use this standard timing frame right here for the juniors. But I would also just say, because so many things are out of whack right now, spend time with your counselor, take advantage of these free resources that we're offering as well, because there's going to be more customization to it this year for you 11th graders, just because the timelines aren't on the normal pace that they have been for past years, and that they will hopefully all be back to for our 9th and 10th graders and younger students than that. Okay, and I'm going to get to a few questions from the 11th graders. Oh, I do have one note for my 12th graders. So I have heard about this recently, and there is a temptation right now. People are scared because they don't have test scores and their tests were canceled. There is a operation that is in Southern California. I'm not going to name them and say anything about them, but if there is an organization that, if you pay them, will have you take a practice test that will earn you and they can guarantee you a 33, 34, 35, or 36 on the ACT on a practice test, that they then coach you to take to your counselor and say, hey, can you include this in a recommendation letter that you knew I could have scored a 35? Don't do that. Don't give in to the fear or temptation to do that, because a few high school counselors called me recently to say, hey, I've got a kid who scored an 11 on their pre-ACT, and they just scored a near perfect score on the ACT on a practice test with this other company. Does that sound even possible to you? And all I would say is, for the parents, if that sounds like a good idea, think about the message that sends to your student. Number two, those counselors at those high schools figured that out. It's not too hard to figure out when someone's trying to game the system, and colleges will figure that one out too. We just saw a lot of examples of people trying to cheat the system a year ago. It didn't work out well for any of them. Resist that temptation. Just do the honest and ethical steps as you move through this. It will all still work out in the end. If you're on this call, you go to an excellent high school, there's no need for any sort of shenanigans to game things like that. Okay, 3 flavors of preparation for my younger students: self-prep, group or classroom, or one-on-one. All 3 of these options can work. I have seen students be successful with all of them. Now, the easiest one to achieve success on is certainly one-on-one, for very obvious reasons. When somebody focuses on what you need to work on and you skip over the parts that you were in areas where you're already strong, and they're giving you targeted assignments to improve your score, that's, for obvious reasons, going to be the most effective form of preparation. In a big group or a classroom, and especially online, we really tend to lose a lot of students, or we see that students that go through that process. It's much more challenging in the large classrooms and large groups, but it does bring the price point down quite a bit. And so for some people, that is the right decision. I would just say, if you're going to be in one of those groups or a classroom, go into it motivated and really try to be proactive and get after it so that you get something out of the class. And then self-prep, it absolutely can work and does work. There are excellent free resources for the SAT and the ACT, a number of them available on Khan Academy. If you're going to do that, it really helps to be a very self-motivated student who can really govern themselves. But you can always try that. And if it doesn't work the way that you hoped it would, then you can try something else. Okay, let's keep moving along. And 12th graders, we did not have a ton of 12th graders, so I'm actually gonna, and we're almost out of time. So I'm gonna fly through this because I don't think we need to get through all of that. I'm going to end with this, and then I'm going to try to answer a few of those questions, which is, what's a good SAT score? What's a good ACT score? There are no good or bad standardized test scores. The tests don't really tell us anything about you. There are only scores that are going to help you reach your goals. And remember that, because that's the answer to a lot of these questions. Do I need an SAT or an ACT? It depends on what your goals for the future are. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. But if you see a situation where a certain score will help you get where you want to go to college, to help you become the person you want to become after college, well, then it's worth it to put some time and energy into that piece of the puzzle. But don't mistake that piece of the puzzle that it really means anything about you. Every single student that's on this call tonight has value in and of themselves, and there is an excellent college out there waiting for you. And while I'm at it, I'm going to say this: great colleges don't make students great. Just think about that for a second. The colleges don't make students great. It's that great students make the colleges great. It's your peers in those colleges. It's that if you have a lot to offer when you get to college, you give a lot to that university, and just remember that through this entire process, because it'll help keep that mental health high, in a good place, and help your performance as well. And that's what we want. All right, thank you so much. That is everything I have for tonight. So I'm going to put that stuff up on the screen for anybody that wants the free testing or other free stuff. And we've even, our bi-monthly newsletter has, evolved into a system that I think is pretty exciting. You actually receive messages based on your graduation year, because a 10th grade or 9th grader doesn't need the same messages as an 11th grader does at certain points in this process. And so if you go to that, if you just contact us through the link for the mock testing, or if you just say, I just have a question, or I just want to be on the newsletter, we'll enroll you in that process. And there's no advertising, none of that. It is just good, actionable information, and it will time it so you get that information when you need it in this process. It's simple things like a reminder to fill out your FAFSA right when college applications are due, and that's the financial aid form for college admissions. So a lot of really good free stuff there. Okay, let's see. We might have time for one or two questions. All right, we answered that. Do the UC school systems and private schools in California prefer the SAT or the ACT? Well, that question could take up all of our time. Great question, by the way, from Madison. They don't prefer either test, but we are in a very interesting time period for the Cal States and the USCs for standardized testing. What we know for this year is that this is just Cal States and UCs are not going to be looking at the test scores. The UC's policy is extremely complicated and is 99% sure to change with each subsequent year. So I'm not going to take you through all of that. The Cal State one is much more simple, where they just said, we're not going to consider SAT and ACT scores this year. When we're back to normal, which they anticipate to be the next admission season, we'll let you know what we're going to do with those scores. And we expect at that time that they will again be looking at SAT and ACT scores. But to answer the original question there is no school, including these California schools, that prefer one test or the other. It used to be the case. And when I say used to, I mean 12 to 15 years ago, there were colleges that preferred one test or the other. And that myth still sticks around to this day, because it once was true. It's just now Every college considers either test to be of equal value to them in this process. They're easily able to convert the scores back and forth. And so, no, they don't prefer one over the other. It's really about which test do you naturally perform a little bit better on. And while I'm at it, I did not mention this earlier. For the juniors and 10th graders right now who are going through this process of choosing between those two tests, if I had one pro tip for you right now, it's that if your score is definitely higher on the SAT, run with the SAT. If your score is definitely higher on the ACT, run with the ACT. Simple enough. If the scores are roughly the same, that's where it gets interesting. If the scores are roughly the same, go with the ACT. And the reason I say that, and I have no dog in this fight, I don't necessarily prefer one test or the other. What I know from seeing hundreds and hundreds of students each year prep for these exams is that students improve their scores faster on the ACT. They improve just as much on the SAT. It takes longer though, and that means more time and energy. If you can achieve the same goals with less time and energy and get back to more interesting things in life, I'm all for that. So if you're in doubt, go with the ACT. And that the reason for that, because someone may ask, is that there's just more content. They test more levels of math on the SAT. They test a wider range of historical passages on the SAT. It's just there's more stuff to prepare for on the SAT. So again, if when in doubt, go ACT. Okay, when you take a PSAT or a pre-ACT, this is why I like OSHA. You guys ask great informed questions that if I forgot to mention one of these tips, you guys remind me. Should you be studying for the test before you take your first PSAT or pre-ACT, or should you just go in blind? I would say go in blind. Just get that natural baseline, and so that because really the value in it is comparing the two. And most students at that point are not motivated to really prepare for each one equally. And what that means is it artificially inflates one score or the other. So just go in blind, see how you do, and then we can figure out which test you're a little bit better at. And that starting score, it doesn't mean anything. It's not going to determine anything. It's not going to be of any real value. And this especially goes for our 10th graders who are going to be taking these tests at OSHA with the tests that we're going to be providing. Those are not going to any official testing agency. The upside of all of that is that we can send you back a score report. It's 100% accurate. And along with that, we'll send you a detailed analysis of strengths and weaknesses that you'll be able to also use. All right, we are right at 6:30, and so if I can figure out how to contact people, I will to answer any other unanswered questions. And if I didn't get to it, submit it through the website, and we'll make sure somebody answers your question. And that is everything I got. Such a pleasure. Great to see you all. I hope the school year continues to go well, and I look forward to seeing some of you again next year. All right.
Thank you, Nick, so much. We so appreciate your wisdom and insights. And thank you, students and families, for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right. Good night.